about Jupiter and Taurus. But before we can talk about Jupiter and Taurus, let's talk first about Jupiter, and then a little bit about Taurus. Then we'll know how to put them together. We'll be able to talk intelligently about that. And after we do those two things, first Jupiter and then Taurus, and then Jupiter and Taurus together, then we can talk about some famous people who have Jupiter and Taurus. And we could look in a little bit more detail at two of those people, Gandhi and Picasso. All right, so this is continuing the series of Jupiter and all the signs, all the planets and all the signs. Please subscribe to the channel if you like this, so that you can get all the future ones that come out, and please check the playlists so you can watch all the previous ones. Also, if you want to get all of these interpretations for all of your planets and your signs and houses and everything else that's active in your chart, then you can go to my website, victorcara.com. And if you do /R2, or you just click around to get to the readings, you'll find the guided tour to your birth chart, which is the reading that you want to order if you want to get all of these interpretations specifically for your chart. Now, without further ado, let's talk about these two components separately, Jupiter and then Taurus. So Jupiter basically is the planet of positivity. It's paired up with Saturn as the planet of negativity. So positivity basically means a plus sign. Everything that is associated with a plus sign, that's the basic nature of Jupiter. So Jupiter is basically about increase, the growth of things getting bigger, things becoming more profitable or successful. That's the basic nature of the planet. Since it's about increasing things, Jupiter is also the planet of creation or production. And hence it's the planet of reproduction, making children, increasing your family, increasing the human race. And because it's the planet of making children, it's actually the planet of parenting. So it signifies all of the figures in our life who play a parenting role. It signifies how we play a parenting role. So that includes teachers, guides, gurus, priests, advisors, coaches, anybody that's in that kind of parental guidance type of position for you. Now, another thing about Jupiter being creative, it means it's going to have surplus. And therefore, since Jupiter has surplus, it's a planet which is able to give. So it signifies generosity and charity. Another implication of the word positivity is optimism. And this is important for Jupiter as well, because it's positive, it's basically optimistic, which means that it basically has a good feeling about the future or a good feeling of things. It sees the good possibilities of things. Hence, it implies a nature which is trusting or faithful or accepting. That's the personality of Jupiter. It's optimistic, so it's trusting, believing, faithful. And since it's trusting and faithful, Jupiter is a planet that's all about those types of things: trustworthiness, faithfulness, honesty, morality, values, etc. And since it's about values and morals and ethics, as well as teachers, priests, gurus, guides, parents, all that stuff comes together to give you the bottom line of what Jupiter is all about, which is wisdom. And wisdom comes in two kind of flavors: philosophy or religion. So in other words, whether it's secular or spiritual wisdom, Jupiter signifies any type of wisdom. Now let's do the same thing for Taurus. The basic nature of what Taurus symbolizes is femininity. Okay, so one of the things about femininity is that it has to do with love. It's very concerned with love because it's concerned with cooperation or unification or teamwork. And that's what love is. Love is the glue that binds people into partnerships and brings people together and makes people care about the needs of others. So femininity has to do with love. This is why Taurus is all about partnerships, cooperations, teams, unity, families, etc. Now this, by the way, is in contrast to what masculinity has as independence. Femininity has cooperation, masculinity has independence. And we see the traits of masculinity from Aries, which was the previous video, Jupiter in Aries. So we saw that masculinity was independent. Now we see femininity is interdependent. Then we see masculinity. Previously in Aries video, we saw masculinity was inceptive or catalytic. On the contrast to that is femininity, which is not inceptive but enduring. So Taurus signifies things which are enduring. So it's got a stable nature, and it's about loyalty and faithfulness. Finally, previous video where we looked at Aries, we said that masculinity had strength or muscle power to it. What does femininity have that's equivalent to that? Femininity has beauty. And beauty is an opulence, a wealth, something that people want to experience. So Taurus represents love, endurance, and beauty. And because of that, Taurus is all about partnerships, love, cooperation, teamwork, loyalty, stability, fixedness, fidelity, which is all about endurance, and also wealth, beauty, health, which is all about beauty, right? So also two important permutations of beauty. One is the arts. Art is the creation of beauty. And so Taurus has a lot to do with arts, and therefore it has to do with learning and intellect, which is the development of skill to produce art. And finally, beauty has to do with health a lot, because health is the condition which produces beauty naturally. So Taurus has a lot to do with health and fertility. Health impacts fertility and beauty. So there you have a succinct picture of what Taurus represents. Love, endurance, and beauty implies arts as well as fertility. And now you also have a concise conception of what Jupiter represents, basically positivity in a sense of increasing things, as well as in the sense of optimism, which leads to this whole concept of trust and values and morals and wisdom. Now we're equipped because we know clearly what Jupiter represents and we know clearly what Taurus represents. So we're capable of putting the two of them together, like putting Jupiter and Taurus, and making a rational, intelligent interpretation of what that represents. So let's do that. When doing this, you always look to see where the planet has something in common with the sign. And the commonality may be going the same way, or it may be in opposite ways. With Jupiter and Taurus, we're not going to see any of these opposite commonalities. We're going to see that Jupiter and Taurus, they have a lot in common. So, for example, Jupiter is a planet of wisdom, and Taurus has a lot to do with intellect, because has a lot to do with arts, because it has a lot to do with beauty, because it's about femininity. So the wisdom of Jupiter gets along quite well with the intelligence of Taurus. So when you put Jupiter in Taurus, what do you expect? You expect a native who's pretty well suited to use their intellect, to learn. They're well suited for education and study. Now, especially, this will be directed towards earthy things. In other words, practical, real things, secular things. Because Taurus is earthy and practical and real and sensual. So the intellect of Jupiter in Taurus is well suited for education and study, especially in secular ethics or secular things in general, like law or politics. Another way that Jupiter and Taurus get along really well is that Jupiter is the planet of reproduction, and Taurus has all to do with fertility, because fertility has to do with health, and health has to do with beauty, and beauty is an aspect of femininity. So, how do you interpret that? Here's the planet of reproduction in the sign of fertility. What do you expect? You expect this person is, first of all, obviously they're very fertile, but that also implies that they're very healthy, and that they're strong, they're not weak. To have a body which is fertile and can produce children, you have to be healthy and strong. So this is one of the important implications of Jupiter in Taurus, is that they're healthy, strong, fertile. You can even add in there probably good looking, because otherwise it's not really fertile either. Fertility also produces attractiveness. And they're pretty good in a parental role. They're well suited for parenting. Now, another way that Jupiter and Taurus get along is that Jupiter is the planet of honesty, or fidelity, right? Trustability. And so is Taurus. Taurus is the sign of loyalty, because it's about endurance, because endurance is an aspect of femininity. So if you have Jupiter in Taurus, what do you expect? You expect somebody that's good with honesty, loyalty, etc. Right? So in other words, they are good with partnerships. If you can trust their promise pretty well. You could trust their word better than most people. When they make a vow, they'll probably keep it. They like committed partnerships. And another thing about this honesty and loyalty is that means that they're willing to give themselves to another person, to you. They're willing to invest into their promise, into their partnership, into their alliance. That means that their basic nature is to be giving and kind. And this has to do with another thing, which is also kind of resonating at the same time, which is that Jupiter is all about generosity and Taurus is all about love. And generosity and love are very, very similar. So it's why on this topic of honesty and loyalty, it's also pretty close. It's resounding very closely or harmonically with generosity and love. With honesty and loyalty, it's going well with generosity and love. So not only are you getting a person that is valuing committed partnerships, but also a person who is kind. And finally, Jupiter is the planet of increase or surplus, and Taurus is a sign for wealth, prosperity. So what do you expect in a native with Jupiter and Taurus? Prosperity. They're prosperous. Money is not scarce. So as you can see, Jupiter and Taurus, pretty damn good. You kind of hit the jackpot if you're born with Jupiter and Taurus. Now, some people that are kind of into the details of astrology, especially Vedic, they may say, but wait, like Jupiter and Venus are not friends. They're not friendly. Why does Jupiter do so well in Taurus? Jupiter does so well in Taurus because even though they're not friendly, Jupiter and Venus are very alike. They're both Brahmanas. And Jupiter's just doing well in Venus's sign because Venus's sign has a lot of Brahminical resources available because it's owned by a Brahmana. But the one thing that you should learn from this discussion that Jupiter and Venus are not really friends, so why is this going so well, is that you should pay attention to where Venus is in the chart. When you're looking at Jupiter and Taurus, take a moment to see where Venus is. Remember the rule that if Venus is too close or too far, then it makes the dignity of a planet in Venus's sign go down. But if Venus is just the right distance, then it makes the dignity of a planet in Venus's sign go up. So just the right distance means 2, 3, or 4 signs to either side. Now that we know what to expect theoretically from Jupiter in Taurus, let's take a look at actual people and see if it kind of matches or alters our expectations a little bit. So here are some well-known people with Jupiter in Taurus. I tell you, I have never seen... I've done every planet in every sign, a video for that, for the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars. And I've never seen this many politicians in one place. And why is that? Look at the first thing. Remember the first thing that we talked about. Jupiter is the planet of wisdom. Taurus is the sign of intellect, but it's a secular, practical, worldly kind of intellect. So that Jupiter in Taurus gives a intelligence that's well suited for education and law and politics. Bam, look at these people. Martin Luther King, John F. Kennedy, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Mao Zedong, Mahatma Gandhi, Vladimir Putin, Vladimir Lenin, Boris Johnson, Tony Blair, Julius Caesar, Imran Khan, Jean-Marie Le Pen, Francois Mitterrand, and Kamala Harris. I mean, some huge names in politics, and as well as some contemporary important names, all with Jupiter in Taurus. It's not a coincidence. Even if you look at the next two names on the list, Jean-Paul Sartre, very political. Stephen Colbert, very political. And then even if you go down and look at the next names on the list, which are the entertainers, John Lennon, Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, Eddie Vedder. And then for artists, we have at least two very, very important artists, Picasso and Andy Warhol. You can also consider these other people like Eddie Vedder, Joan Baez, John Lennon, Bob Dylan artists. But for the visual artists, Picasso and Andy Warhol are Jupiter in Taurus. It's because Taurian intellect is more sensual and practical. So it's the same reason. The same reason that makes it suited for politics also makes it suited for arts. But let me tell you, it's more suited for politics. And to explain that, I'll show you the difference, or to illustrate that, I'll show you the difference between these two charts. Here's one chart for Picasso and one for Gandhi. Now, that's because Picasso, he's mainly an artist, and Gandhi, he's mainly a politician, lawyer/politician. Okay, so why? Like, they both have Jupiter in Taurus. We can see why Jupiter in Taurus would support being a politician. We could also see why it would support being an artist. But why is it that Picasso wound up with the artist thing and Gandhi winds up with the lawyer-politician thing? So the first thing to consider with the two charts, or with any chart, is how prominent is it? Like, for example, if Bruce Lee also happens to have Jupiter in Taurus, but how prominent is it? Maybe Mars somewhere is much more prominent than Jupiter is. So let's assess that in these two charts. Which planet is more prominent? Is Jupiter playing a very dominant role? Then the more dominant aspect of Jupiter in Taurus will be more visible. Is Jupiter playing a more supporting role? Then the nature of Jupiter in Taurus is more malleable to blend or meld to the more overriding conditions in the chart, right? So for Picasso, his most dominant planets are Rahu and Saturn. Now, if you ask me why, you can watch one of my videos where I explain how to calculate the dominance of a planet. It's on my channel. But basically, it's all about how the planets line up with the ascendant and with each other, and which one is influencing the others by aspect and conjunction more. With Rahu is getting a lot of aspects in this chart, and it's very, very influential on the moon, which is very, very important. And it's very, very influential on the cusp for Picasso, which the cusp is 6 degrees because of his ascendant. Also, Picasso's very, very dominant Venus as well, on the third house, which is for the hands. So, and Saturn it's in his 10th house, very much on the cusp, so it's very prominent. Jupiter is taking a secondary role in Picasso's chart. What's more dominant is Moon in the 5th, with Rahu, and Venus in the 3rd, in Libra. So basically, you have this person with artistic talents coming first, being supported by Jupiter and Taurus. So naturally, it's not going to make him a lawyer all of a sudden. The artistic nature of Jupiter and Taurus will come out for Picasso. Whereas with Gandhi, Jupiter is the most dominant planet. And you could see it's basically opposing every other planet. So it has huge aspectual influence in the chart. And the second most influential planet is Mercury, which is also highly intellectual. Right, so in Gandhi's chart, Jupiter is setting the tone. In Picasso's chart, Jupiter is assisting the tone, which is set by the Moon and Rahu in the 5th and Venus in the 3rd. As far as Gandhi, he actually has quite a serious 3rd house with Saturn in it. He has quite a serious 5th house with Ketu in it. And his 11th house is also pretty serious, I would say, because its Lord is debilitated. So it's not lit up in an artistic way like Picasso's is, where his 3rd and 5th are vibrant. Gandhi's 3rd and 5th are turned down, and his Jupiter in Taurus is dominant. So he becomes a politician and an artist, a philosopher type. Picasso, he also has the traits of being a politician or a philosopher, but those are small traits. The main trait is artist. Why? Because his dominant things are indicating art, and then his Jupiter is supporting that. So I hope that makes a lot of sense. Again, it gets very, very interesting when you look at actual charts where you can combine everything. If you want to see how all of those things line up for you in your chart, I have a report for that on my site. It's victicera.com. Click to the reports or the readings and order the guided tour of your birth chart. And you'll get every planet and every sign, every planet in every house, all the lordships, all the yogas, everything explained, and put into an order which gives you a context of which is more supportive and which is more dominant. So thank you very much. I hope this helps you understand Jupiter in Taurus, as well as the whole basic mechanism of astrology and how it works. Please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and watch all the rest of the videos that I have. Thank you. See you next time.